So as I was saying, now we're going to have a deep dive into what the EIB Group is doing in terms of our action plan for housing, what financial instruments and tools we are putting at the service of this sector, and as well some insights into market trends. But we are going to be setting the scene with a video.
Cuando nos dijeron que nos había correspondido el piso, no, pues mira, es como si me hubiera tocado la lotería.
When I first came into the apartment, I couldn't believe it. I was over the moon. It was like a big child.
Our new housing action plan is a game changer for cities. We are scaling up support with faster financing and targeted advice. It's about delivering 1 million better, greener, more affordable homes by 2030.
It's based on 3 pillars. The first one is innovation, trying to promote new innovative construction techniques. The second pillar is about renovation, because there's a huge stock in the cities of aging housing that needs renovating. And the third pillar is about increasing the supply of affordable housing.
On gagne pouvoir d'achat. Ça nous permet aussi d'être plus à l'aise niveau courses, éventuellement de se dire qu'on peut prévoir des vacances un peu plus souvent.
Nous avons besoin d'énormément investir pour racheter des immeubles privés qui ne sont pas rénovés par le parc privé e per finanziare la rénovation, les transformer en logements sociaux ou abordables.
Molto importante la partnership con EIB, soprattutto per l'advisory e per trovare delle soluzioni tecniche per finanziare il nostro piano casa.
Saber que el Banco Europeo de Inversiones está articulando las medidas teniendo en cuenta el papel capital que tienen las ciudades, porque lo están viviendo a la vez, pero para solucionar esta crisis de la vivienda para nosotros es súper importante.
Get this has changed me in loads of different ways. I feel like I have a future, I have hope.
Today and this morning, what the EIB is doing, we have a housing, an action plan for housing, for affordable and sustainable housing. We have heard our president, our vice president mentioning it, but now I would like to introduce Tanguy Desrousseaux. He's a director in the Projects Directorate of the EIB. He's director for housing, cities, and regions, so that he can explain to us better why this is such a big priority for the EIB.
Thank you very much, Maria. As you saw, many people on the videos are repeating themselves, so I try not to do that. I was surprised to see myself as well. So you find out every day, so that's good. Thank you, David. So here, okay. So I will give you a few words in 10 minutes. So sorry, I will rush through the slides, but it's recorded, so you'll be able to have a second look at it, and I expect that will be distributed as well. So first of all, a focus on the 3 pillars again, then give you some details about our action plan and how we've implemented it so far since the approval earlier this year, and finally a reference to the web portal. So first of all, to put things in perspective, why are we doing housing? Well, housing, we're doing it because it is one of the flagship initiatives under the bank's 8 core priorities that have been defined at the beginning of 2024. We do it because it supports our climate bank objective. We do it because it supports also the social infrastructure in the European Union. And finally, we do it also because it supports the modern cohesion policy. here, the last one that was underlined here, the Pan-European Investment Platform for Affordable and Sustainable Housing, that is the Commission's name, which we've adopted also to try and participate into this wider initiative. You've heard a reference to Tech EU from our president this morning. The lending envelope, which is the focus of today, also participates to the Tech EU initiative. In terms of where we are with a focus on 2025, you will see that, interestingly enough, we're positioning our actions between the creation of the Commission's task force that was in February of this year and before the announcements that we all expect and that Barbara was saying will be on the 16th of December this year. And everything we do is to try to contribute from EIB's perspective to the wider EU plan. Interestingly, in those milestones here, we have met with a number of stakeholders, obviously the Parliament, but also the Committee of the Region, the Economic Social Committee, with Housing Europe. We've had a number of encounters as well. And we're starting today with this roadshow that will be replicated in other cities. Out of those priorities, which I will take in reverse order to change also and avoid the repetition, I mean, it's all about increasing the supply of affordable and sustainable housing in the market. And increasing the supply would be mainly done with new build, but also through renovation, repurposing, using vacant property. But today's focus is on innovation. So I think the key with innovation is to try and reconcile the view of the public sector and the private sector. The public sector trying to inspire innovation from the private sector. The private sector finding the motivation and the purpose to implement innovation. And from that perspective, I'm just like me, I suspect you're very keen to hear from the Roland Berger study that will be presented in a couple of minutes, because that will try and reconcile what is happening or not happening, why it's not happening, and what we could do to make it happen. This one I will not repeat too much. You see that you can recognize the figures that were presented earlier, this 50%, 20%, 30%. So 50% faster is an objective that could be targeted with modular construction, 20%, up to 20% of lower cost through digitalization, automation. I hope Heiko would not contradict this too much, or maybe he can specify that and give the other perspective, because that came from the EIB's investment report. And finally, the 30% for energy efficiency design. Here, so examples of what we've been doing to support key innovations, so using sustainable materials, energy efficient design, the modular construction, off-site construction using automation, digitalization solution. We have already signed loans with 3 clients. Some of them will be represented in the panels this afternoon, and I thank them for being here today to testify. So with Ulma, that was signed this year, Heidelberg Materials a couple of years ago, and Gropius as well for modular construction. I will not say much more on this because my colleague Sanjoy will present the lending envelope and its features in a second. Now, these are 2 slides that you will take time to read after today, I suspect. The first one is on lending, the second one is on advisory. I mean, the particularity of the EIB is not only we provide financing to support projects, but also we provide advisory services. And advisory services for new build, or well, especially new build, it is linked to creating the right regulatory framework that supports sustainable and affordable housing. But from the perspective of innovation, is also try to build capacity, and this we can do. So as I said, the lending envelope I won't say too much on. and indeed advisory to foster innovative construction, leading to bringing down the costs, given that the main issue is that affordable housing is not affordable at the moment. Here, examples of what we've done so far. I mean, the action plan has been approved by our board of directors in June of this year, even though we've been working on designing the plan a year ago. But already you see that there are some tangible results. On the one hand, in terms of financing. So this TechEU Pan-European Lending Envelope was approved week before last, very recently. Ulma I've mentioned already, and to give you some examples of impactful transactions, so pretty large transactions that could make a difference when we're talking about more than 10,000 units that could be put on the market with new programs. We've got two examples, one on renovation here with Société Wallonne du Crédit Social, that's it in Belgium, and two examples of operations that we do with our partner in France, so Caisse des Dépôts et Consignations, where we've been doing a lot of social housing in the past, and I can refer also to this social alliance for social housing, which I think has been quite successful, together also with SEB, so Council of Europe Bank. So here, this year, it was more focused on affordable housing. And and I should mention also our subsidiary, the EIF, so the European Investment Fund, and where we've had first transactions with TDP in Italy to support student housing. So that's what we've done so far for lending, and there's more to come. I mean, you remember that one of our objectives for this year is a volume of lending, which we ambition to increase by 40% year on year compared to the last 5 years. So that was 3 billion on average. And this year, our objective is to reach 4.3 billion. So you may think that in comparison to the figure quoted by the aggregate of national promotional banks, their 75 billion is not that big. But 40% in 1 year, I can tell you that this is very ambitious. So we're trying to achieve this, and it's underway. So hopefully we'll be able to do even more in the future years. Finally, on advisory, what have we been doing? First of all, on innovation specifically, there is this study that we've asked Roland Berger to help us with, which will be presented in a second. We continue to work for renovation with the ELENA advisory mandate from the Commission, trying to scale it up, to scale up schemes of energy efficiency renovations. And the one I would want maybe to pause a second on is what we are trying to do with new builds. I mean, you see that the examples of lending transactions were mainly focused on those countries where we've been operating for a number of years, in some more than 20 years, so 12 member states. And what we are trying to achieve with our action plan is also to reach out to the other member states where we haven't been active, and we couldn't be active because either there was no regulatory framework allowing us to do that, or the market perhaps was not mature enough, or for some reason, whether it's economically or socially, politically. But here, we've got 3 examples here of advisory mandates which have been well received. The one in Croatia was in Zagreb last week, and even it was quoted by the Minister for Finance that it was appreciated that we could support the development of social and affordable housing in a country, focusing on 5 cities, representing about 50% of the units in Croatia, which would allow them to develop more social housing out also in the smaller towns. So that was an important one. As far as PPPs is concerned, that's a delivery mode. We've been supporting Latvia as well, and Crete with student housing. So, I mean, maybe one point which is particularly important, as I say in the last sentence here, is the advisory that we provide as part of the action plan supports our lending. So there's a clear connection between the two. Finally, because I think I've more or less exceeded, I've exceeded a bit my time. A reference to our web portal, which was launched in March of this year, where you will find a wealth of information about the sector, about what we've done, some storytelling as well, the products that the EIB can support affordable and sustainable housing with, and also links to what is provided by our partners, whether it is the Commission, but also the national promotional banks. So that was an EIB web portal that was launched as part of our initiative, and I will stop there. Thank you very much, Maria.
Many thanks, Tanguy. You have been speaking about the fact that the EIB group will provide not only financing, but as well advisory. It's good that we have Sanjoy Rajan with us. He's the head of division in the Operations Directorate for Corporate Lending and more specifically for advisory. But Sanjoy, he will be telling us more about the financial instruments that we have, the tools that we have to finance all these urgent needs. Sanjoy, please.
Thank you, Maria. Good afternoon. Indeed, I want to focus on the financing products that the EIB Group has, advisory services, what we can offer in particular for innovation in the housing sector, and give some particular details on this lending envelope. It's been mentioned right from the start, the President, Vice President. The full title is Tech EU Innovation in Housing Lending Envelope. The board approved it last week. But before going into that, let me actually say a little bit about Tech EU. It's a term that you'll hear more and more from the EIB. Tanguy even mentioned it. It's come up. So what does Tech EU mean for the EIB? It's the EIB Group's program dedicated to accelerating innovation across the EU. It represents about 70 billion of debt and equity for innovation, which is expected to mobilize about 250 billion euros by 2027 in the innovation sector, not just for housing, across all sectors. Just take those two numbers, the 70 billion and the 250. Typically, the EIB lending, for every euro the EIB lends, there's a factor of about 3. So that's 70 to 250. And I think it's important you retain that, because when I come to the lending envelope, that number also is important to understand. We've heard a lot about the challenges that cities and the sector faces. So the EIB Group, including, so it's the EIB, the bank, plus the EIF, we maybe can't single-handedly resolve all of these, but I think, as we've seen in many other sectors, the catalyst effect that we can play can be very important, not just in the financing, but also the advisory. So let me start a bit about what instruments we have. And they're essentially two dimensions, types of client, types of product. So in terms of clients, counterparts, we can essentially work with all types, startups, growth stage, SMEs, mid-caps, municipalities. An excellent example is today what we signed with Barcelona, the 113 million. Public sector, financial intermediaries, banks, large corporations, and of course also PPPs, project finance. So it's really a huge range. In terms of the products, and I'd encourage you, I mean, very recently we actually put out on our internet a product catalog. So those of you who aren't so familiar, because it's relatively new, I'd encourage you to look at that. So this also ranges across the whole spectrum: intermediated equity through investment funds, direct equity, venture debt, and actually one of the clients who's here and will speak later benefited from this venture debt, guarantees, securitization, bond purchases, something relatively new, where we're actually purchasing green bonds, which are issued by corporates typically. It could be public linked as well, liquidity instruments, direct loans, which is a big chunk, and PPPs and project finance. So this sets a very large framework. Those of you who've worked with us know this already. we're always happy to chat and understand where the client should fit within this matrix. A subset of all of this comes under the InvestEU fund. This was set up by the European Union, and it provides risk coverage to the EIB as a key implementing partner. This cooperation with the Commission allows the EIB to engage in higher risk financing, including extending loans to smaller, less developed companies over a longer period of time than would be possible. Another product, and this has been mentioned by Tanguy, and in fact, Vice President Sakiris, in addition to housing and other things, is also in charge of advisory at the bank, is the advisory services. A great amount of the advisory services actually also come under the broad InvestEU framework through the InvestEU Advisory Hub. Hub has 3 key areas of focus: project advisory support, market development of emerging sectors. Heiko will present. Heiko's work that Roland Berger undertook was funded through the InvestEU Hub, and also capacity development. Just to wrap up on TechEU, you saw the portal for housing. There's actually a portal for TechEU, and in particular, there is a TechEU investment ready checker. So entities who may wish to benefit from EIB products in this innovation space can actually go in. There's a YouTube video, in fact, which shows you what you can put in, and then you will be directed to the right part of the EIB group to take your queries forward, whether on loans, equity, guarantees, advisory services. There will be later from a client a particular example of venture debt, and that's the solution available for growth stage companies, also supported under the InvestEU fund. So it provides startups and mid-caps with long-term patient capital at very competitive terms to help their innovation and their growth. Now, I just want to say a few words on the European Investment Fund. Tanguy mentioned a couple of things they're working on. So indeed, these transactions, which he mentioned in Italy with the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, it's also a good example of the co-financing the EIB does with national promotional entities. And so far, where EIF, in terms of innovation in housing, where they have acted, is in some venture capital funds that contribute into SMEs or small mid-caps that may support innovation in construction, but it's within the broader venture capital funds. Now, if I come to the lending envelope, what I'd want to, I just want to get this in order. What I want to say, you've heard a lot about it. We really see this as a catalyst. We had the work from Heiko and Roland Berger. How does this work mechanically? You've heard the number of 400 million. You've heard it's a lending envelope. So maybe let me step back. What does a lending envelope mean for us? What it is, it's a high-level framework. It's not going to be a 400 million loan to a single entity. It gives us this umbrella, and we would assume, given that we're targeting mid-cap size, there may be between 5 to 8 projects that come under that. It's 400 million, so maybe a 50 million loan. Again, remember that multiplier impact. So the total 400 million may allow between 800 million and 1.2, 1.3 billion in actual costs. 5 to 8 projects. What it does for us is we have this board level approval, and we also, I mean, the issue of permitting has come up and the time. We also have issues in doing things faster sometimes, as some of you may have seen. But what this allows, having had that approval, for the projects that come under it to go through a slightly lighter process of approval because the envelope has been approved. It's very important. It's pan-European. We want to, it's not dedicated to any particular part of Europe. We want this really to seek impactful investments across Europe. It has also a combination of EIB own resources and also InvestEU. And remember what I said about InvestEU allowing us to offer a certain product to companies which may be in the developing phase. So it has that impact as well. I should also say it's not just through this lending envelope that we could do innovative financing in the sector. There may be, and there will be, I hope, still bilateral operations, but this also exists. The four areas I think you've heard, so the innovative construction methods, modular circular, advanced materials, low carbon cement, self-healing concrete, RDI in manufacturing, bricklaying robots. I mean, these are not exclusive, but they give a sense of what we're looking for, and digitalization. So the strategic objective is to help the scale up, accelerate delivery, support affordability by bringing costs down in the chain, so build smarter, lower cost, and more sustainably. Another thing I'll just mention while I'm ramping up, EIB is a bank, so it's loans. But that doesn't mean we don't know how to blend this with grants. And we're very used to doing that. Grants have been mentioned. This is something we're very happy working with. Co-financing with other entities, private, public. This is also absolutely what we do. Our process does take a bit of time, but we have deliberately set it up as this framework to try and reduce the time of any operation that goes under this umbrella. So you've heard a lot. We've approved it last week. The success isn't in the approval. The success will be in deployment. We look to people in the room. We look beyond. I will say, and Maria is the head of office for the EIB group in Spain. We have offices in every EU country, a very good channel if you want direct connection is to contact the offices in your country, and then it'll be channeled towards the right people in the EIB. So we look forward to exchanging even more, and we really want to build this pipeline and show that this can be a bit of a catalyst. Thank you.
Many thanks, Sanjoy, and picking up on what he was saying, absolutely right. We are here to help you, and in the Madrid office, we can be your contact point, and we will then contact our teams in Luxembourg for you. So now we have Heiko Ammermann. You are a senior partner for Roland Berger, and you are leading a study conducted by the EIB on housing construction. We've been hearing some data today before the representative of the city of Rome was giving some data on certain savings, and he was saying if this data is correct, then it's a no-brainer, the choice to go for innovative construction methods. So Heiko, I would like for you to walk us through the study that you're giving, and I guess there's a lot of data, right, in your study, and some insight that you can give to us on whether all these numbers we are throwing around are true or not.
I tried to keep the data light a bit for this presentation, but I think the full study will be available at some point to download as well. So first, thanks for inviting me and for doing this study. It was a really great pleasure to look into the sector, who is not a big buyer of consulting services, unfortunately. Before we start to look into innovation, let's quickly look. Well, I think we have heard a lot about the housing crisis and how bad the problem is, so I will just skip that part. But I think if you look at the data country by country, it really is a massive problem in all member states. It's definitely worse in the big cities, but it's really everywhere, and the housing crisis, you can feel it. If you think about the people who don't have a home, it's really quite dramatic. So basically, taking a step back, what are the challenges for the construction industries until 2050, and hopefully much quicker than that? The first is the CO2 footprint has to come down. It's one of the industries that has made very little progress in actually reducing CO2 emissions. And there's a lot of potential there, but practices and methods have to change. The second one is that that's a little bit less known, but everybody who lives in a big city knows how much waste comes along if you tear down a building and you build a new one. All the packaging, every brick is packaged, you have tons of plastic waste. So that needs to change, and we need to move into circular construction, which is a real trigger also for reducing CO2. And it's also an additional challenge because a lot of these modular systems are not per se easier to reuse. So there's a bit of a contradiction there. Deployment speed needs to increase significantly. Stuff has become more and more complicated over the last 30 years. Regulation has heaped stuff on top, health and safety, and none of that is bad per se, but construction has become very slow and very complicated. And the fourth thing is reduction of costs. Historically, the big times of social housing construction have been the 70s and the 80s. Since then, most of the money was made in luxury homes, in development for sale. So building cheap is not something that has been the prevailing trend in the industry, and that again requires a change and a change of mindset also with architects, with structural engineers, because now if cost is important, it does make a difference to add this 10% extra buffer in the structural engineering. It does make a difference whether the city requires to have green here and green there and accessibility there. So we have to talk also about standards and requirements. Now let's quickly look at the state of construction today before we go into innovation, because this is obviously the starting point. And the message here is it's very challenging. The construction industry is in the deepest crisis for 2 decades, and basically most of the companies are not thinking about how they can innovate, but basically how they can stay alive. And they have eaten through most of their equity over the last 3 years. We do not really see an upward. It's picking up in some markets in the recent months, so there is a little bit of an improvement. But honestly, most of the big construction players and almost all of the construction material players have absolutely no financial or mental capacity to innovate at this point. So the first thing that needs to happen is we need to get the sector moving. We need to get construction going before we can actually ask for big innovation scale-ups, because currently nobody is really willing to the risk and has the balance sheet to take a risk. The second challenge we have in the construction industry, if you have built up a successful construction company, the key thing that you have learned is how to establish a method to build successfully with a ton of low-skilled labor, with a huge language barrier, and a very sort of risk-averse clientele. So this is not exactly an environment where people are happy if some young engineer comes up and has a great creative idea how you could change things. The probability is the guy will end up in some basement foundation and not in the Hall of Fame. So this is something we have to recognize. It's not an industry where innovation is driving business success. The business success is driven by keeping things simple, rinse and repeat, and keep your cost under control. A third bullet, and this is also, it's not a problem, but it's just how the industry is. The industry is oriented or organized in hundreds and thousands of small contractors, and there's a lot of jobs there. There's a lot of low-skilled jobs there. It's a huge motor for integrating people into the labor market. So this industry is incredibly important, but that again, it does not make it easier to roll out a concept across an industry that you just switch to sustainability now. It's a very cumbersome process. And the fourth point, and we've talked about that already, is today in most tenders, whether they're private or public, it's price, price, price. We hear a lot of talk about innovation and green construction in trade fairs and conferences, but if you look at the real world tenders, most of them are purely on price, and of course technical specifications. But we did not see a lot of tenders where you actually have a premium for having green materials, healthy building environments. So that is something also where the public side needs to work on. And the trend is not really pointing upward. So as a starting point, end of 2025, if we say we want to build 1 million units until 2030, there really needs to be a shift in the number of units that gets permitted and that gets built. Now, enough whining. Let's look at innovation. And there is a ton of innovative companies and materials and methods that are basically ready to go. We try to structure that a little bit. So on the left side, we have an amazing number of solutions that are really drop-in technology, like bricks that you can handle like traditional limestone bricks, but at a really low CO2. We have wood bricks, we have straw-based interior wall systems. In Spain, we have cork-based plaster solutions that really also bring a lot of insulation. So there's an amazing number of innovations. They're certified, they're ready to go. They have built their 5, 10, sometimes 50 pilot projects, but they have a huge challenge to come into the mainstream construction market. We will look at the reasons for that and what we can do about it in a moment. So this is the one segment. I would say this is if you want to change today's industry, this is where you start, because you can really drop it in today's value chain and go. Then we have a large number of efficiency drivers, incremental improvements like thin joint masonry, where you just save a lot of material. We have a lot of interest in augmented reality systems. We have robotics coming to the construction site. It's of course easier to use robots in a factory than on a messy construction site, but we are getting there. We have seen quite a number of amazing systems. A lot of those IT-based systems have a bit of a challenge to translate into the rough reality of construction. I used to say, throw it out of the second floor, drop a brick on it, and have it sit in the rain for a week. And then if it still works, you're ready for the real construction site. If it doesn't, you have to go back to the lab and make it more robust. Also, if it needs a manual, it's too complicated, because people don't read manuals. It has to work. And this is what the challenge is, and I hope we get there in the next 2 years. But again, also these companies need projects to practice, to scale, and to basically go into the mainstream. And then, and this is really my favorite segment, the whole aspect of circular construction. Materials that you can use as they are. You can tear the building down, you disassemble it, you reuse the bricks or the windows or the plastering. This is probably the biggest potential to save cost and CO2. It's also the biggest change for the industry. And not only for construction, but also for developers. Developers want to build and sell. Nobody thinks about what happens with the materials 40 years down the road. But we have seen a couple of amazing projects. We have seen very interesting financing solutions where you can rent the material. So you don't buy the bricks, you rent the bricks for 20 years. You need less equity. And then you basically give them back and they can be used for the next project. A lot of amazing stuff. Again, this requires quite some financial engineering. A lot of how do you put my brick on the balance sheet that's rented? How does that happen? How can it depreciate it? So a lot of interesting questions, but we see quite a bit of innovation there. And then we have spoken about these modular and industrial production a lot. I mean, flat panel system have been the market for 30, 40 years. They're not per se new. What we see a lot of advancement by basically combining 3D planning and digital implementation, robotic production. We've seen one maker, they make a wall in like 2 minutes and then ship it to the construction site. What we see a lot is complete bathroom modules, because this is basically where you have the highest complexity and you have the water. Water is always a disaster in construction. So we see a lot of very practical stuff there. And then on the right side, this is really sort of one of the future pathways where you deliver basically complete modules and you just stack them on top of each other, or you print with 3D printing, you print whole building hulls. This is a bit earlier stage, huge potential for saving costs, but also a lot of challenges because you of course need a lot of money to finance it. And what is often underestimated, in a very dense inner city, getting the equipment in to actually move these huge modules and to stack them on top of each other is actually not that easy. And These cranes cost a ton of money. You need the crew there. So it's not easy, but it's one segment that is really very promising. Now, looking at the challenge of getting 1 million units until 2030 and hopefully much more after that, we have tried to sort this a bit along a couple of dimensions. And one dimension is, how do you actually scale the technology? So you can scale it off-site by going into an industrial production plant, or you can scale it by basically dropping it into today's value chain with these 100,000 of companies. If you get these to change, you also can scale sustainable production without requiring a big investment into a huge plant. The second is, what trend do we see in the materials? And there we see basically two trends. One is high-tech materials, composite materials that have certain functional elements. Often they will probably not be reused. So there's upsides and downsides. A lot of them are really, really light, so that it's easy to transport. But on the lower end, by simplification and using sturdy materials, you have a higher chance of going to circular construction. So these are two other axes. And then how do you increase the efficiency? And efficiency has to come up. If you look at the productivity increase of construction, it has barely changed over the last decades. It's sometimes joked that the last big innovation in construction has been to move from pyramids to like rectangular shapes. And we need to be much quicker to get innovation into the actual construction. So of course, we will have a lot of robotics and then AI in factories, but we also need to bring robotics and AI to the construction site. And this requires much cleaner construction sites. It requires also to dumb things down so that robots can actually do it. But we have seen a lot of interesting approaches there. So, and then you can plot all these tons of, we have probably seen more than 500 very interesting elements of innovation that could really help. And you don't need all of them to make a huge progress. You can probably reduce CO2 footprint by 80% and cost significantly by using just a couple of these elements. And then you have cross-cutting. We need to have digital planning. We need to have building information. Construction sites need to go digital. Today, you pay your architect to do everything in 3D, and then the guy works with the printed plan, and that's just the reality. We need to look into circular financing. We can use augmented reality systems to basically bring the low-skilled workforce to build things in a different way. And just to basically think about what are the endpoints of this. We have illustrated two end games where we think these trends could lead. One is sort of the high-tech industrialized construction. And you have Gropius here in the afternoon. They follow exactly this vision. So you produce offsite, you do everything from the initial planning to the delivery, completely integrated in a digital process. And of course, by scaling this up, you have cost advantages and things just get simpler and easier. Likely, this approach will focus on lighter materials because you have to transport these modules and you have to find a crane that can actually lift it up and stack it on top. We will probably have a lot of high-tech elements in the houses because you have a controlled environment to assemble it. So it's much easier to bring in IT components and digital components than on a construction site that's wet and dirty. And that's one perfectly valid vision to basically develop construction. The other end game, and I'm an equally big fan of that, is you reduce complexity by going from over 40 different materials today to like maybe 10 different materials in the construction tomorrow. You go for bio-based, sturdy materials. You choose materials that can be reused, so you go into circularity. You use today's industry structure and the existing players with their tens of thousands of workers to scale, it's easier to reach scale, but of course you have to win over these companies. You use BIM and AI and robots on site to do the construction and to aid the construction. And from a tendency, this will be more low-tech, so it will be simple bricks, simple insulation, simple plastering, durable stuff, simple materials that are also simple to use. And you can continue to use low-skilled labor. Both of these end games have a perfectly legitimate reason to exist. Both have very special requirements to scale them up. If we start on the right side, obviously the big advantage is you are really quick on site. You can build a house in a week. And it doesn't matter whether it's 1 week or 2 weeks, but it's not 2 years. If you reach scale, you do have cost advantages, but that's an if, because you really have to reach significant scale and you have to have larger batches of pretty similar houses. In this setting, of course, it's easier to bring in new technologies and more sophisticated materials. The challenge is you need a lot of money to build up this capacity, also a lot of time. You are quite sensitive to business cycles because, as the automotive industry is finding out currently, it's not nice to have a production system for 400,000 units if you can only sell half of that. You use a ton of money, and in a very cyclical industry like construction, this is probably the biggest challenge. And this is also the financing and the sensitivity to the business cycle, which makes the investment risky, is the answer why the costs in this have not really come down. And I'm a bit skeptical whether the costs that have been announced here can actually come down in this dimension. And sort of more soft factor, but a relevant factor, this is very disruptive. You put a ton of architects, structural engineers, construction companies, and construction workers out of business because you capture the full value chain. So basically, every incumbent in the market will see you as a threat. And that doesn't make it easier to scale up quickly. But it's a very valid approach. It's very inspiring to rethink construction. And I think we will see this succeed. The question is, will it capture 2 or 10 or 20% of the market? Now, the drop-in side, the big benefit here is you can scale through existing workforce. A contractor that changes from limestone bricks to wood bricks, that's not a super big change. Changing from mineral plaster to cork-based plaster is also not a big change. And you don't need to build big capacity. The capacity is already there. You need to do a lot of teaching and training, and you need to dumb things down because the simpler it is, the easier is it to roll out. It's more flexible. So in the inner city, smaller plots, that's a big benefit. And this, I would say, as a tendency, this is more suited to circular materials. The big challenge here is you have to overcome this very conservative industry. You have to sell it to each contractor, given the language barriers, given the skill level. This is a long-term task. But I think in this huge market, there is a lot of space for innovation, and a lot of innovation will happen in between. But what we have to keep in mind with the target for 2030, most of that will be built by construction companies that are already in the market now. And it will be built with materials that have already been certified now. So basically, if we look at the challenge to 2030, it's really what can we use, what innovations are there that are ready to go and ready to scale up. And if we today have 90% of the market or 80% in the basically traditional construction, maybe that will go down to 70% over the next 10 to 15 years, but that's still 70 to 75% of your market. So this I think deserves more thinking and more attention than everybody is currently talking about modules and industrial production, but we also need to change the current construction industry if we really want to achieve the objectives. So how do we scale this innovation? And this is really very hard. We have talked to a lot of innovative construction materials makers. And they all find initial projects, they all find a couple of demos, and they find a couple of companies who are willing to build 5 or 10 houses. But then the challenge is, how do we get into business with the really big players who build 1,000 units a year or 5,000 units a year? And the challenge here is planners and structural engineers by nature tend not to be very happy to do things in a new way because they carry the risk in the end. Construction companies per se don't like risks, and they don't like to change things, because how do they explain it to their workforce who don't speak a single language and are basically all over the place? Tenders are very price sensitive, and the markets are super fragmented. I mean, even in the big markets, you barely have like big champions that dominate a national industry. It's very regional. Sometimes it's even local champions. And that's okay, because in construction, a company that builds 4,000 or 5,000 units is a huge player. But in the context of what we want to do until 2030, that's not a lot of houses or units. So it's just, the question is, how do we deal with that? And I think there is a couple of things that can be done. Yeah. First is create momentum. The construction industry will not be able to change course if there is no momentum and it's dead in the water. So the most important lever is to get construction going, and I think the financial instruments help a lot there. The second one is go for larger batches that create a predictable takeoff for innovation drivers. If we have a tender that promised 2,000 houses, if the material is sustainable, that would help tremendously. Make it simple and keep it simple. Go for one CO2 KPI, go for one circularity and a cost KPI. I think we sometimes in Europe have a tendency to overcomplicate stuff and to come up with a multi-dimensional framework. This is not how the construction industry works. Go for ruthless competition. The construction industry is really geared towards competition. It's very opportunistic. So if they see there's a big bag of money, but you can only access this if you have a construction method that's 80% CO2 reduction, they will go for it. They will team up. And this is the last point. If you announce in the next 10 years, we have 50 billion for sustainable construction, but you can only get the money if you work with innovation drivers, you build with wood, you respect circularity, and you have a certain quality guaranteed, they will move. They will go for that money. It's very simple. But reality today, it's small projects, and basically the war is for the lowest price. So I hope that helps. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Heiko. We have heard lots of words that have been going on throughout the whole day, like fragmentation, how scaling up, momentum, and keep it simple. This is something that it's very, very recurrent in all the discussions. I think we have just 2 minutes. We are actually going behind schedule. So would you have any question for our panelists? Yes? We have one there.
Hi, thank you very much to everybody. I am Ainara Fernandez from the Institute for Human Rights in Business. And although I really do appreciate having a study on the state of the construction sector around Europe, I think that the approach of this study creates a lot of blind spots, because we're talking about housing systems. Housing systems, they are made up both of supply and demand. And all the previous interventions we have heard today, they spoke about innovating also in terms of governance, innovating in terms of social participation, innovating in terms of reskilling. And unfortunately, I haven't heard anything that has to do with people, with workers, with residents, as part of this study on the state of the construction sector. And I wonder if there is any reflection that the last speaker would like to add on these points.
If you don't mind, we can take just the second question, and like this we see whether it's or not also addressed to you, and you can tackle both of them at the same.
Hello, this is Victor Montes. I'm the CEO of a startup called Be Aware. My question is related to the innovation trends, because I was kind of surprised that you were not spotting innovation the evolution and the revolution of artificial intelligence as a potential innovation trend. You were only referring to artificial intelligence, we're talking in relationship with robotics. And I wonder if that's just because you are focusing more on construction methods, and you are not focusing so much on project management and all the inefficiencies related to how we manage construction projects, or because you are skeptical about the potential impact that this may have. Thanks.
Thank you. So that's it, right? Yes. So Heiko, if you'd like to address both.
Quick answer to the workers. Indeed, the workers were not the focus of the study, because regardless of how you build and what materials you use, you always have to observe the health and safety issues. And I think construction is a great industry. It creates a lot of jobs, but of course it's also a very sensitive industry, because this is actually where the hazards are really relatively high. But yes, it was not really the focus of the study. When it comes to the governance of what gets built and whether tenants get a right to say, this was also not really the scope, because that's something that the developer defines. And if they decide to basically define their houses by having certain requirements or not, it has to build anyway. So that was not really the focus. Regarding AI, I think AI has a huge potential, especially because it will enable robots to play in a much rougher and sort of less organized environment. You couldn't imagine current industrial robots on a construction site. You can actually, and we've seen a couple of systems, humanoid robots, who can actually manage quite well to orient themselves and actually to clean up. They just pick up the hammer and put it where it's supposed to be. But so yeah, it's a big driver. It's also a big driver in planning, like digitalizing. Yeah, that's actually given. And I think we will actually see a lot of practically usable systems in the coming years. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. So thank you, Heiko, Tanguy, right, Sanjoy. Thanks a lot. You are all invited to have lunch with us. It's just upstairs in a restaurant called Terracita. It's in the square. And we would like you to ask, please, to go back to the room 5 minutes to 2, because we have to start sharp at 2 p.m. to be able to respect the rest of the schedule for the afternoon. Thank you very much, and let's continue later.